Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Ian Kavat. Today we're discussing Beijing's total ban on Japanese seafood imports and Taiwan's expulsion in favour of China from observing a Central American parliament. With me to discuss this are Lai I-Chung, president of Taiwan think tank, the Prospect Foundation, and Leonard Zhao, National Tsing Hua University adjunct professor, Taiwan People's Party Mainland of China Affairs Committee Chair. President Lai and Ambassador Zhao, very warm welcome to the show today. China has imposed a total ban on Japanese seafood following Tokyo's release of treated wastewater from the Fukushima nuclear plant. In 2011, the Daiichi nuclear plant was crippled following a devastating earthquake and tsunami. Let's take a look at some figures of the main radioactive element remaining after treatment. According to the International Atomic Energy Agency, the Japanese discharge has a tritium concentration far below 1,500 becquerels per litre. This compares to the World Health Organization's limit for drinking water at 10,000 becquerels per litre. President Lai, let me come to you first. So Beijing has called this discharge a selfish and irresponsible act. What's behind China's response?
It's basically very overblown because you look at the scientific evidence. The amount of the Japan's water discharge is actually much lower than what can be allowed, and the standard that's set by IAEA. And also, if you look at the other international nuclear power plant, they discharge the wastewater. Even with China, that in year 2019, the nuclear power plant of China residing along the coast, the total discharge is about 35 times then the amount of the Japan discharge in terms of the radioactivities. And also the Korea has a single power plant that in year 2000, I think it is 2020, they discharge about 4 or 5 times higher than the amount of the Japan in terms of radioactivity discharge in these times. So basically, if we look at the year 2019, year 2020, none of those countries, they protested. So how come that they wanted to protest against Japan, which actually discharged much lower an amount of the radioactive
Can I ask
waste.
you, President Lai, about those figures that you provided, especially for China? Where did we get those figures from?
Yeah, you can argue that because I got it from the NHK. Of course, China will say that this is from the Japan's national media. But the NHK provide all the figures that is open to the source, and also how come they got it? Because they got it from the Chinese the website about those nuclear dumping the materials and management. So basically, that what we're looking at is that when your own nuclear power plant is discharging more than what Japan is discharging, but there's no complaint about that. And then when Japan came out with this amount and you protest so overwhelmingly. And another thing is that when we look at the tritium, the so-called radioactive nuclear waste itself, the radioactivity came from the beta decay. Which, especially we look at the energy, is about 5.7 keV, and 1 EV is basically 1.6 10 to the minus 19 joule. So it's very, very low. And the electron that can travel, it can easily be stopped by less than 1 centimeters air. Now we're talking about water, which is much more denser than the air, so that it basically won't be able to hurt the people anymore.
Okay. So, Ambassador, has the issue been politicized by China against Japan, or has Japan not been transparent enough, which is some of the accusations?
Well, the answer is quite simple. It's a resounding yes. I think China not only highly politicized this issue, but also this is as we have discussed before, that it's absolutely not a scientific issue. Okay, all the facts, all the known figures, okay, as I-Chung mentioned earlier, that point to the fact that the discharge from Japanese Fukushima is lower than the WHO regulated. That's right. Yeah. So now, obviously, China is trying to try to make a fuss, make fuss over this issue because a lot of reasons. The relation between China and Japan has always been a fragile one. Okay, now we all know very well that China, given the recent increasing amount of challenges from abroad and within. I think the Chinese people tend to be more irrational, and sometimes, I hate to use the word, vexatious. Vexatious meaning that making trouble out of nothing sometimes. Because let alone that the recent incident that the US, Japan, and South Korea, they had a summit in Camp David earlier this month. And this summit came up with a joint statement among the three countries, in which particularly Japan and South Korea, used some strong language to express their opposition to China's so-called dangerous and aggressive behavior in the maritime disputes in the East and South China Sea. So it's kind of adding something, to an already, very tense, very tense relationship between the two countries. And we know this is unfortunate. We have witnessed some of the more and more and some fervent, nationalists in China. So anti-Japanese sentiment is getting high.
That's right, yeah. You touched on a lot of issues there. So obviously there's the historical tensions between China and Japan, and then you mentioned that the very recent sort of geopolitical alignment of Japan with the US. Let's have a look at, we do have some figures. President Lai also mentioned some. It is interesting to look at how much tritium is being released by nuclear power plants around the world. Let's take a look at the numbers provided by one international scientist. So in treated wastewater comparisons with Fukushima, Korea nuclear plant in South Korea discharged 91 trillion becquerels in 2019, more than 4 times Japan's proposed discharge. French reprocessing plant at La Hague discharged 11,400 trillion becquerels in 2018 into the English Channel, more than 12 times the 22 trillion becquerels committed by Fukushima, again without harm to people or environment. So these obviously back up what President Lai said. Let's pick up on one of the themes that Ambassador mentioned, which is the anti-Japanese feeling and sentiment. Now, Japanese Prime Minister Kishida has called on China to urge its citizens not to stop acts of harassment and hate, both in China and in Japan, against Japan. So we've had some stone throwing incidents, egg throwing, there have been crank calls targeting Fukushima, but also in China to Japanese embassy and schools there. How does it serve China on all the different levels to rouse and incite this sort of anti-Japanese feeling?
Yeah, I think the development, especially the so-called Chinese against the Japanese in general, that's really a sad episode that we witnessed so far. Basically, I will argue that it is precisely because of the China cannot handle its own domestic issues. Its economy is now rising, and the youth unemployment is actually also rising, and the real estate issue become a very big bubble that's about to burst and probably already burst. And there's the outcome for the Chinese people of the future is very bleak. And I think the Beijing government right now, despite knowing that the Japan's discharge of nuclear wastewater is harmless to the human being, but continue to direct the whole attention about Chinese people toward Japan, is precisely try to export its own problem, try to divert the attention of the domestic discontent toward the government by directing them to the outside government. And Japan just happened to be the one that right now that China believe that is an easy target to divert the attention. So this is, in my view, that's very irresponsible governmentship by the Beijing government, but also tells us how fragile this government and how insecure this government about its own legitimacy within its people.
Ambassador.
Well, if I may add up something, that still I don't think this current tension will last for a long while, because on the surface, I rather believe that the Japanese government and that of China, they're trying to tone down the current tension among the peoples, okay? Because as we know that the relation between China and the United States is approaching a certain form of rapprochement, given the recent, I think the current visit of Secretary Raimondo. I think they reached agreement between the U.S. and China. So normally, traditionally, we can see that Japanese, in terms of the foreign policy formation and execution, most of the time they follow what the U.S. is trying to do. I think that given the both countries, namely Japan and China, they're trying to smooth up their relations. As I was told by the Japanese representative office in Taipei, a high-ranking official recently invited me to lunch, and he told me honestly that they're trying to reach a summit, a meeting between the Mr. Kishida Fumio and Xi Jinping. Okay, but the state visit is out of the question. They thought about having a state visit of Mr. Fumio to visit Beijing, but it's not possible. So rather, they were looking forward to, they're working on a possible meeting at the APEC summit in November. So I think maybe, so they're trying to move this way. So I don't think they will go even worse.
So President Lai, is there a danger there that, as Ambassador said, because Japan wants to move towards that meeting, that summit with Xi and Kishida, that they will accept this sort of treatment and that they won't they won't defend themselves too much because they don't want to escalate the issue, and is there risk and is there damage in their reputation whilst they do not do that?
Well, I think that Japan definitely does not want it to escalate the tension, and Japan is actually the one that's been on the receiving end. Yeah. But I doubt whether China would like to tone down this temperature, because the whole the protests and everything is not purely just from the public or the society itself. It's actually found out by the government about how dangerous those water is and how it be harmful to the Chinese people. And so people started to stock the NaCl, the sodium itself. So that is the very strange behavior. And unless the government is not, I will say that the phenomenon will not happen unless the government is fanning out. So that I do not believe that, I do not think that the current tension will just quickly draw down due to the effort by both governments. China is the one that brings the temperature up. And I think that's, there's a political purpose for this government. What you try to divert the attention, and it won't stop until the hatred or the discontent about this government has been fully smoothed out.
I'm not saying that tension will die down very quickly, okay, but I think they will stop somehow, somewhere. And because the tension is going even higher, that will not serve the interest between the three sides, namely Japan, China, and the United States. So the U.S., is working halfway through the rapprochement with China and Japan. Of course, this is a very natural reaction from the Chinese public. Any fragile issue, like any kind of a nationalistic issue like this, will be vulnerable to some public reaction. But I think it will not go any worse. It should be stopped in a matter of time.
Okay. President Lai, if I just ask you very, very briefly, so let's contrast what's happened in South Korea towards the Japan's release versus China. South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol had seafood lunches this week, obviously as a show of commitment and support of that.
Yeah, I think South Korea's reaction is a big contrast with China. In the past, South Korea always stand with China, but this time it's very different. Of course, you could say that this is because of South Korea, the attitude toward China is different, and also South Korea's attitude toward Japan is different from the Moon Jae-in's government. But I also believe that at this time, the South Korea, this government's reaction has been backed up by the IAEA, the endorsement about people should not overreact to the so-called dangers of this nuclear waste waters because it is not as dangerous as some people argue. So I would say that that's why the South Korea this time is behaving so differently from the Chinese.
Okay. Now, within the same week of China's ban on Japanese seafood, Beijing also banned mangoes from Taiwan, citing evidence of a pest that would harm Chinese agriculture. The Chinese mango market represents only 0.5% of Taiwan's mango production, a result of the country's strategy of diversifying to the South Korean and Japanese markets. But attempts at coercion from China aren't just limited to trade and economy. In early August, the Central American Parliament voted to expel Taiwan as an observer in favor of China. Guatemala, where the parliament is based, is the only member that still has official ties with Taiwan. The others, El Salvador, the Dominican Republic, Honduras, Nicaragua, and Panama, have all switched diplomatic recognition to Beijing in recent years. Ambassador, let me come to you first. So we've seen the expulsion of Taiwan, as we said, from Palacen, and it was Nicaragua, a former ally of Taiwan, that proposed this. Is this all about Lai I-Chung's visit to Paraguay and his transits in the US?
Well, yes, and beyond the Lai I-Chung's visit, but I think the overall situation covering both sides of Taiwan Strait is far from being better off. Now the China is always trying to never stopped coercing Taiwan, but maybe the military way of doing that is unlikely. I think Xi Jinping. I don't think Xi Jinping will do that. It doesn't serve their interests so far. Let alone given the economic downturn and some other challenges within China, as I mentioned earlier. So China is not looking for some extension of their tension with crisis. Okay, external or internal one. So the military coercion is out of question, but they will not stop, harassing Taiwan in many respects, agricultural products and some of the diplomatic coercion and some economic, extension. So I'm rather concerned about this ongoing, ongoing exercise by China. So this time, our expulsion from the Central American Parliament, it's not surprising to me as a veteran, foreign service officer. I don't think they will stop. It's a beginning. The first, it won't be the last. You'll continue this kind of diplomatic coercion, diplomatic pressure. But this is unfortunate. I think this, legally speaking, or some historically speaking, it doesn't make sense. We are one of the founding members, but I think that is a sign of our ongoing some crisis in the diplomatic field.
President Lai, so let's talk about the significance in practical terms of Taiwan's removal and withdrawal from that body and China's inclusion as an observer. Let's take a look at some reaction from the US. Senators Marco Rubio and Tim Kaine issued this statement. Since 1999, Taiwan has served as a strong partner in its role as a permanent observer of the Central American Parliament, encouraging good governance and economic development in our hemisphere, while China's regime has consistently undermined democracy, hindered sustainable growth in the region, and subjected Uyghurs in Xinjiang to state-sponsored genocide, torture, rape, and arbitrary detention. So, President Lai, can you give us an idea of, practically speaking, what does this mean?
Well, the immaterial term, probably the expulsion itself would not hurt Taiwan that much. But of course, diplomatically, the participation or through the observership in those meetings, many times will give us some high-level encounter with the leaders that usually Taiwan won't be able to meet due to the lack of the diplomatic recognitions. So in the diplomacy, yes, there's some detrimental effect on that. But I think the more legalistically problematic issue is actually the Nicaragua using the resolution 2758 in 1971 of the UN resolutions as a case that Taiwan should be exposed and China should be invited, by saying that the resolution 2758 of the 1971 UN resolutions certified that the Taiwan has been represented by China, so that Taiwan has no sea and should be represented by the Beijing government. And if this is probably the first time since the Cold War ended about the citing the resolution 2758 to support for the expulsion of Taiwan from the international gatherings. And if that is become a norm, then that will become real issues for Taiwan. So that's why the
we've got it here. If you don't mind, we can actually take a look at that that resolution. So as you mentioned, the Central American Parliament cited the UN's 1971 resolution, the expulsion of Taiwan in favor of China, and they said, quote, that it says Taiwan is a province of mainland China, which disqualifies it from participating as an independent country. So let's take a look at what the UN resolution 2578 actually says. It says the United Nations General Assembly decides to restore all rights to the People's Republic of China and to recognize the representatives of its government as the only legitimate representatives of China to the United Nations, and to expel forthwith the representatives of Chiang Kai-shek from the place which they unlawfully occupy. Okay, so maybe Ambassador Zhao, if you could just summarize, what does that resolution actually say?
The resolution, okay, very simply, the 2758 resolution did not say anything related to the Taiwan being a part of People's Republic, nothing at all. It just simply granting the seat of the Republic of China at the UN to that, of the new People's Republic of China. However, I would like to point out, very few people, I'd like to say that very few audience can recognize that even Taiwan has been expelled from the UN back in 1971, okay, based on the resolution 2758. The UN Charter did not change our country's name as the Republic of China. At least that's a fact. Two related clauses within the UN Charter still they indicate that Republic of China, let alone that ROC is one of the 5 founding members of the UN back in 1945.
So what's the significance of not changing the name, Ambassador?
Because I think it's very complicated to amend any UN Charter clause. So that's why China trying to do, but this is a fact. China is very obnoxious. They're trying to use this this resolution 1971 to put some of the one China Taiwan being a part of People's Republic of China, but it didn't work because at that time during 1970s the Chinese international influence it's not as high level as it does now. So I think that they couldn't do it. So over the past ever since, they're trying to step by step push the envelope, trying to to cajole all of their diplomatic license. Say, okay, put it this time. Okay, make a long story short. This time they used that. They asked the U.S. senator, the senator was saying that because the Central American Parliament, they're following this resolution is actually. I think it's very obviously fabricated and manipulated and being treated like People's Republic of China.
And President Lai said that if this is set as a precedent, that the damage to Taiwan will be significant. If you're saying if other organizations.
Yeah, because the issue right now that at least on our side and also with our friends, we need to go internationally to dispute that the Chinese distortion about the resolution 2758 because Taiwan has not been represented, it's not being represented, and will not be represented by the PRC.
The U.S. Congress actually has tried to do this, isn't it, through the Taipei Act?
That's right. And also we believe that the United States State Department, and also in about 2 years ago, the senior official came out publicly accused China of distorting the resolution 2758 as China is representing Taiwan. So right now, I think since this the so-called distortion and wrongly representation has officially been used by some international body as the evidence or the support that they should expel Taiwan and in favor of China, then there's urgency that we need to do the disputing the campaign internationally in order to let the Chinese distortion would not go unhindered.
And what do you make of Ambassador's point that...
Well, in addition to, I'd like to say that very honestly and very sincerely and very effectively, in addition to the campaigning worldwide, we shouldn't rule out the possibility of reaching some of the dialogue, talking with the other side of Taiwan Strait. Whether you like it or not, I think it is a matter of time. Otherwise, otherwise this problem will remain unsolved.
Okay, but my understanding is that the other side of the Taiwan Strait, as in you mean China, will not talk to Taiwan unless Taiwan says it is part of China.
Not now. I think the dialogue is always the name of the game for any international affairs, international dealing, even between the U.S. and the formerly Soviet Union back in the last century.
President Lai, final words.
Well, I think the dialogue with China, definitely that is a desirable outcome. But right now, the more urgent issue is that we need to let this lie be exposed and let the international community knows that the true facts about the resolution 2758 to prevent China from the distortion and the misuse again our international participation.
I simply hope that right now talking about the campaigning worldwide about let's stop going straight to the resolution 2758. We're talking over and over again. It seems like why don't we try to use some imagination to make it work? That why don't we challenge China or their diplomatic allies? What happened to the Republic of China in the UN Charter? Can you do something about that? Why don't we go back to let's talk about the Republic of China, or you change your national name from PRC to Republic of China. How about that? Instead of going straight, why don't we just circle around, detour to talk about, discuss about new issue, Republic of China within the United Nations.
But will Xi Jinping accept this?
Well, let's talk about it. We make an issue. That's their problem, not ours.
Xi Jinping doesn't want to talk to us.
Well, we don't care. Let's talk. That's right. That's the name. That's work of art. That's the beauty of talk.
That's diplomacy. Okay.
That's right.
All right. Thank you. If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching our show today. Stay safe and see you next time.